Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me, being more of a Bulgarian than a political scientist, to present on this panel. And it's a great, really honor to moderate two of the most respected and well-known leaders of the democratic West today. I made a small calculation before coming. Between the two of them, they have been serving in elected offices, either in government or in a parliament, as long as Bulgaria had a democratic political history. And I don't know these days, is experience helping you to be re-elected, but I do believe it helps you very much to understand where we are. And talking about the state of democracy today, I just want to make 2 points. If we're going to say that democracy has a problem both in Europe and America, we're going to make an understatement. Obviously, people are angry, there is an expectations, crisis of judiciary power. The parliaments are particularly kind of under attack because the political representation is something that is questioned by different people from the different part of the political spectrum. But I have one good news and one not so good news. The good news is that when today basically you listen to people saying that democracy is dying, keep in mind that this is what people have been saying all the time. In 1985, I'm repeating the year, 1985, one of the best-selling political books, both in Europe and America, was a book by a famous French political thinker, Jean-Francois Ravel, who calls How Democracies Perish. In 1985, he was sure that Soviet communism is going to prevail in the Cold War. So from this point of view, the resilience of the democratic system is something that we should not forget. But on the other side, the fact that democracy has prevailed and survived before is not a guarantee that it is going to do it again. And this is why I want to go basically with the opening statements of our two very distinguished participants, because I'm very much interested just in 2 questions. First, what do you believe is different today than in the previous crisis that we know? And secondly, to what extent democracy can keep the West united? Because I very much agree with President Steinmeier, we cannot take the West for granted. Neither Europe can take for granted the American security umbrella, nor I do believe America should take for granted that basically Europe will follow. So from this point of view, I'll start with you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's very wonderful to be with you, Ivan. Your reputation precedes you as a great thinker on democracy, and I'm honored to participate with you today, as I am with Mr. President of the Bundestag. Wonderful to be with you again here. You are a leader in the interparliamentary world that we share, and I'm honored to be with you. Where's the ambassador? Mr. Ambassador, you are a force of nature. Thank you so much. Isn't he wonderful, Ambassador Islinger? Thank you so much for such a long time sustaining such a powerful meeting on the subject of what we all take an oath to do, protect and defend our people. So with great admiration, I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Mr. President, that's the 3rd speech I've heard you make in the last 8 weeks. That was a tour de force. How do you feel? Do you feel okay? Feel good? Presenting that challenge, taking inventory of our challenges, but also inventory of our opportunities that we have. What an honor to be with you again. Let's again hear it for the President on this wonderful speech. But perhaps when we talk about anything to be optimistic about, we have one of the largest delegations ever to the Munich Security Council. And I want all of our members to stand up. Our House delegation led by Adam Schiff, Chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and Senator Chairman Lindsey Graham leading the senatorial, which has some House members in it too. Any of the senators here, please rise and be recognized. But it is, last year we had a big delegation as well. Hello, how are you? So it is an honor to be here. Now here, you asked those 2 questions, but first I wanted to say, as I was listening to you, Mr. President, and to you, Mr. Ambassador, I was thinking of when I was a student, long time ago, and I was at the inauguration of President Kennedy. And in his address, the whole world knows, Ivan and Mr. President, that he said, "The citizens of America ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." But the very next line in that speech, most people don't know because there was so much applause for that. "The citizens of the world ask not what America can do for you, but what we can do working together for the freedom of mankind." And that was like a clarion call to so many of us at that time. John Kerry a little younger, but you've read about it in the history books at least. and so the working together for the freedom of mankind, no condescension, total respect, as the Constitution of Germany talks about, as equals working together. And we have been doing that. As I say, we have a very large delegation here, not because we aren't busy back home, but to pronounce and reconfirm, obviously in case it's needed from some, of our strong commitment to multilateralism, a strong commitment to the transatlantic relationship, which is in all of our interest. When we talk about US and NATO and the rest, it's in our mutual security interest. It's not the US helping Europe, it's about all of us helping, working for global security. And so my members stood up, so I won't go to that again. So this year, as was indicated by both the ambassador and the president, we are observing so many commemorations. Many of us in this room were together in June for the commemoration of Normandy, invasion of Normandy and the triumph that was. Many of us were together, as we were with you, Mr. President, for the celebration of the victory at the Battle of the Bulge. I wish you could have heard the president's speech there. You were so magnificent, spoke truth to us, accepted what happened, taking us into the future. And then shortly thereafter, we were, again, just recently, and some of us in Poland first at Auschwitz and Birkenau, and then in Jerusalem, where we heard from you again, talking about how we go into the future from a dreadful past. But all of those occasions were commemorating a triumph. But when we spoke to the veterans who were there, in their 90s, mind you, they talked about the triumph and they talked about how important it was and the rest. But their constant message to us was, pray for peace. Pray for peace. Pope Paul VI, he said, if you want peace, work for justice. And as we talk about global security, we have to talk about some of the issues about justice, economic, and all kinds of justice as well. So when we talk about it, we talked about, as you talked about, what we're talking about, our policy should be about the alleviation of poverty, the eradication of disease, investments into economic development, to wipe away some of the fury of despair that is a fertile ground for terrorist recruitment and the rest, and we'll talk more about that on terrorism. But right now, the subject of this that you have given me, Mr. Speaker, the state of democracy in the West is increasingly uncertain as cynical actors seek to destabilize a force of authoritarianism. We have to face that is an intentional decision as they work to undermine democratic values that our soldiers sacrificed for and that unite our nation. Some attack the sovereignty of others, just the physical sovereignty. Others export digital autocracy, weaponize economic leverage, fail to combat xenophobia, fail to combat the growing anti-Semitism that is there and has been acknowledged this morning, normalize corruption and kleptocracies. As leaders and lawmakers, we must be vigilant against those who seek to erode our freedom, our justice, and the rule of law around the world. We must defend our democratic values and our commitment to multilateralism, which is essential to our success. We must respect the international rule of law and seek peaceful resolution of conflict. And we must be vigilant against the forces of autocracy that are out there to defeat democracy. And that, I mean, your speech and your presentation, and the realistic part of it is scary, but on the other hand, it's a call to action and just recognizing what the challenges are. We may have some different views on one or another thing, but the fact is the recognition is a giant step forward to finding answers and solutions. The House of Representatives, we are very much committed to the Western Alliance and to NATO. House of Representatives reaffirms it since last year when we were here, reaffirmed its support for NATO by passing H.R. 676, which states that NATO is, and this is what passed in the House of Representatives, a pillar of international peace and stability, a critical component of United States security, and a deterrent against adversaries and external threats. Our robust transatlantic partnership is critically needed as we face all of these challenges. And I must say that I was very happy last year to host for a joint session of Congress the Secretary General of NATO for the 70th anniversary. Nothing like that had happened before, a joint session of Congress, which was very well received. And all of this is so important as we fight terrorism. All of the discussion that some of us were growing up about Soviet Union, United States, et cetera. Now we have an asymmetrical threat in this terrorism. Again, it is, and it comes to terrorism, NATO's partnership has been critical to conquering terrorism from Afghanistan to Iraq to Africa. The coalition to fight ISIS is a NATO commitment. In addition to military force, though, we must embrace the whole of government approach and use our soft power to ensure security. And I said it before, I'll say it again, the U.S. and all of us must continue our investments in people, recognizing the dignity and worth of all of them. Again, the alleviation of poverty, eradication of disease, ending the fury of despair. Another challenge facing our democracies is the threat to non-proliferation, as has been said. Today, there is a disturbing erosion of the arms control framework that has kept the world safe for decades. Irresponsible governments are accelerating their pursuit of nuclear power and missile capability. The world can ill afford an arms race. Non-proliferation has always been a pillar of American national security. We must preserve our non-proliferation framework, working together as NATO allies. The climate crisis, as has been mentioned again, I'm so glad you did, and to recognize it as a national security threat. National security experts testify in Congress and meet with us regularly to point out what a national security threat it is. The erosion of habitat and all the other things that are results of the climate crisis enable a competition for resources, competition for habitat, and the rest to cause conflict. Our distinguished former Secretary of State, Mr. Kerry, has been a champion on this issue, as have many of our members who are here, and you'll be hearing from Lindsey Graham later on this subject. I don't know what that will be, but you'll be hearing about it later. Many of us were together, we were together in France for the speakers meeting on the G7 nations led by President Ferrand, President of the National Assembly, who lifted the priority of climate crisis to the top subject. It was wonderful. And when we do this, and then some of us were in Spain together for COP25, and our message there with our big delegation is, we're still in. We're still in. When I host the 2020 G7, which I hope you'll be coming to, and Mrs. Schäuble as well, this year in the U.S., the theme will be addressing the climate crisis, economic and environmental justice for all. We must commit to big thinking and bold action to combat the challenges of vulnerable nations. Income disparity and the climate crisis are really connected. as they are fundamentally linked, we must affect international security, and that's, again, what our national security experts tell us. Let us do everything at every level of government. Let us recognize the importance of interparliamentary interactions to that end. Now I'm going to say something that may not be agreeable to many of you here, because you invited candor, no lecture, but candor, and that is the subject of 5G and cybersecurity. China is seeking to export its digital autocracy through its telecommunication giant Huawei, threatening economic retaliation against those who do not adopt their technologies. The United States has recognized Huawei as a national security threat by putting it on our entity list, restricting engagement with U.S. companies. Nations cannot cede our telecommunication infrastructure to China for financial expediency. Such an ill-conceived concession will only embolden Xi as he undermines democratic values, human rights, economic independence, and national security. Allowing the signification of 5G would be to choose autocracy over democracy. We must instead move to an internationalization. I know Europe is working hard on this, Europeanization and internationalization of digital infrastructure that does not enable an autocracy. Not an American or European model if we can't come together, but an international model. And so we must invest in other viable options that will take us into the future while preserving our values and securities. Again, I come back to President Kennedy, what we can do working together for the freedom of mankind. Together without condescension, but with respect and cooperation, let us defend our democratic values. Let us do so, strengthening our interparliamentary relationships for the freedom of mankind. I thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Mr. President, in the last days, basically, Germany became a normal democratic country. Because for the previous decade, you didn't have crisis. You didn't have basically pros. So now you're back to the European normality. I'm very much interested how you see the state of democracy and also how this is going to affect the transatlantic relations. Please.
Thank you very much. I will not speak on the German situation because our president has spoken very openly, and so I can only support what he said. But I would like to add, the state of democracy is under considerable pressure everywhere in the West. Each country is facing its own specific challenges. However, these alone do not seem able to fully explain the erosion of trust in the political system. There are developments which are affecting all Western societies equally. The growing complexity caused by globalization and digitalization is making societies more and more heterogeneous, confusing, and prone to conflict. And the same is true to the public sphere, without which democratic opinion-forming process can't take place. The internet is fueling a trend towards the formation of bubbles of like-minded people. In addition to competition for people's attention, it's intensifying online. Truths, half-truths, untruths appear side by side, and it has long been clear that fake news is fast news. It spreads more quickly than correct information. And this is why blatant lies have long since become an effective tool in the battle for people's attention. That's the situation. That's why our system is undergoing a stress test. And we still need to find an answer to this. I firmly believe, however, that liberal democracy is not finished. I read a book some weeks ago. Quite the contrary. Freedom, democracy, the rule of law, social justice, solidarity, respect for universal human rights, all of this value which characterize the West still hold immense appeal. This is clear from the nervousness of authoritarian rulers when the population articulates a desire to live the way we do. Just look at Hong Kong. In the competition of systems, the future of Western democracy will also be determined by whether they can continue to secure freedom and prosperity in the globalized world. Values, principles, and rules are one key aspect. Economic success is the other. Both are needed. The success story of the Federal Republic of Germany after World War II is not only our good constitution, but also what we called the Wirtschaftswunder. Combining freedom, social equity, and incidentally environmental responsibility with the market economy, efficiency, and growth, that's the challenge. And parliaments in particular must credibly give people the feeling that their needs are being considered in this context. Security, the preservation of social bonds, togetherness. They can cope with the incredible fast pace of change in the modern world. If that fundamental trust fades, the Western democracies will erode further from within. But perhaps the crisis and the fragmentation of the public sphere of the media even constitute an opportunity for the principle of representation. If Parliament becomes a forum for the pooling of interests, for concentration on the issues that truly matter, and for uncomfortable discussions, debating matters openly in parliaments is the most effective weapon against populism. Rather than focusing solely on the promises made by demagogues, we need answers of our own to the major challenges of our times, and the leadership to persuade people to support these answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I'm going to do something that you're going to like. I'm going to ask just one question, and then we are going to go for your questions that you can ask from the floor. But my question is the following. Listening very well to you, Speaker, part of your message was that now the competition between systems is not going to be so much about ideology, like in the Cold War, it's going to be about technology. And it comes the problem of 5G, infrastructure, and so on. So I'm very much interested, Mr. Schäuble, to what extent basically Germany also shares the idea that the competition between democratic system and authoritarian systems is going to be very much about technology, technology dependence. But then my questions to you, Madam Speaker, is if you believe that it's very important to have democratic companies securing our digital, does democratic companies mean only American companies, but also European companies too?
Well, I said internationalized, internationalization of it, wherever that democratic approach may be. But I don't think it's just a competition between ideology, technology. The whole point is to protect democracy. Yeah. You must be able to have this highway. I'm a very religious person, and I always think about the Romans. When they built those highways, they enabled the spread of Catholicism because the apostles and St. Paul could travel and take the message, as has been known. And my colleague Jane Harman was just here, but anyway, she's been coming here for 20 years. This whole, she was in Congress when we passed the telecommunication bill, which was then the information highway. And we believe that that information highway should be about privacy, about communication in a free way. So it's not that about let's compete on technology. It's about let's promote democracy by having that information highway be one that is a democratic system, not an autocratic system, as I see the challenge we have now between autocracy and democracy. And as I said in my comments, let's internationalize all of this, but let not it be the sonification of it, because I think that will be to the detriment of democracy.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I think the subject of modern technology, especially the 5G, and all this discussion is a good example for what I tried to say in my introducing remarks. We had, even in this week, very tough discussions in parliamentary groups and with the government. on the relation between security and technology. And we have seen, and we have to debate this, and we will find solutions which are controversial, but at the end we will decide by majority what is parliament. Yeah. And on the other hand, we all know the other point is we have to strengthen European cooperation, not to be against everyone, but even to be relevant. And therefore it's an incentive to increase European cooperation that Europe will, even in the future, matters in security reason and technology innovation, because otherwise we cannot be a reliable partner, neither for the United States nor for stabilizing the global world.
Do you agree?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Please, it's time for your questions, comments. You can basically ask for the floor. You can basically decide to write. This is why I'm keeping this in my hands. And the idea is really to have a frank discussion. I do believe that the only reason you choose a Bulgarian to moderate is that we are not going to speak long. Please. Yeah. Can we have a microphone here?
There.
Yeah, please. And just please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure it's working, is it?
Yeah,
Yes, it is. I'm Hélène Conway-Mouret, Vice President of the French Senate. And thank you very much for your speeches and very sharp analysis and the honesty with which you all spoke. I just have a simple question. I fear that the answer may be a bit difficult. We see the rise of nationalism, of the extreme right, all through Europe. We have examples in France where the Front National, the extreme right, has qualified twice for the presidential election. The AfD is the third political group now in the Bundestag. And throughout Europe, we see the same thing. And yet, they are elected through democratic process. So I'm just wondering, what are we getting wrong for people to be so angry? Because I think it is anger. It is a whole lot of very bad feelings they're expressing through that vote that goes counter to the democratic values that we all cherish and which you very well spoke about.
Thank you very much. I suggest you get 2 more questions so you can have, please, there was a question there and then question at the back. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, where is the microphone? Yeah.
The first question was to you, if I got it right.
Hello, Latvian Vice Prime Minister and Defense Minister. We are all speaking about democracy, but obviously democracy is in trouble because we see the fragmentation of societies because of media, because of politics, etc. One of proposals is to have more democracy. But isn't that even more fragmentation? Because what we are lacking basically new ideas of adaptation, daring, and even more lack of efficiency. And if democracy is not enough efficient in competition with either other systems or what we call populists, we are going to fail. What do you think?
Yeah. Thank you very much. And 1 more question, and then I'll go back to the panel.
To Nancy Pelosi, I very much appreciated your comments on China and Huawei 5G. Does that mean that you agree in substance with the China policy of President Trump?
We're not. We have agreement in that regard. We put in our national defense authorization bill language that has Huawei on the entity list. Yes, yes. Because I do believe that it is a real danger to put all of that power in the signification of 5G, and we have to be very careful about how we go forward. And again, let's internationalize the solution, but let us not, this is so predictable, I don't know why it's not so self-evident to everyone that you do not want to give that power to an entity created by the People's Liberation Army. Okay, so that's where it came from. If they had an idea, good. But it's not in furtherance of, and you know what, I'll say this other thing. There are all kinds of aggression. There's aggression, as I said, into a country, as we saw into Ukraine. There's aggression, economic aggression and the rest. This is the most insidious form of aggression, to have that line of communication, 5G, dominated by an autocratic government that does not share our values. In answer to your question, I think we talk about the challenge between democracy and autocracy, but there's another challenge here, which is nationalism versus globalism. And the president talked about this, as did the ambassador. Nationalism versus globalism. And we have to recognize that while we all take pride, there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. And again, some of the things that I hear from young people, and I'm glad that the ambassador is looking to the future, and I have maybe 4 of our delegation are members of the freshman class, so we have the future coming from our Congress right in this room, is that we have to address some of the issues. What are we doing having a debate as to whether there is a climate crisis? There is. Now, what are we going to work together to do something about? Young people care a lot about that. Income disparity is really almost sinful in terms of the exploitation that is there that creates this income disparity, and young people see that and they want us to do something about it. Years ago, I was traveling with a delegation into the Middle East, and I always ask to hear what the young people have to say. In one country after another, they said, we're so tired of our leaders who are so consumed with war, and we just think they use it as an excuse not to address climate or fairness in terms of our economy and respect for what we all have to contribute. So it behooves all of us to have a message that gives people hope rather than saying you should probably assume this. And I think that's part of it. But this insecurity that springs from their concern about their economic future is there. But the fuel is fed by those who feed the flame with xenophobia, anti-immigrant fervor, and the rest of that. So again, the president very adeptly defined what some of the challenges are. It behooves us to make a decision to do something about it, not to just wonder how it happened. It's unfortunate, xenophobia, LGBTQ discrimination in 60-some countries in the world, issues that relate to women and their dominance in the society and the economy and the rest, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. All these things are not right, but in order to give people hope, we have to show them a better path. And I think that members of Parliament have a good way of doing that. I'm forgetting the second question, which I'm sure is for this.
The question was, is more democracy the answer to the crisis of democracy?
Oh, yes.
Let me take.
Yeah,
Please.
okay, Mr. President.
Okay, coming back to the second remark, second question. I think referenda are not more democracy, with all due respect. I am totally convinced that, especially in our modern world, with the world of communication, which we have on the basis of the technology of digitalization and so on, the principle of representation is key for democracy, and it doesn't work without representation. And with all due respect, even the Brexit decision in a referendum in UK is for me not a proof against, with all due respect. And it was a little bit ironically that the country with its most proud history of parliamentarism, that is, it's a model of the German constitution, the Westminster model, left the most important decision to a referendum, and it was not very well done, with all due respect. Having said this, the role of representation needs the parliaments, and parliaments don't only work if you have parties which work sufficiently efficient. Otherwise, we leave it to demagogues. And that's our problem today. And therefore, we have to think about what's about. Looking to, with also respect to the United States, I feel some weakening in the role of parties in the United States. And maybe that is not the problem of one administration, as our president has just mentioned. And therefore, I almost say to my fellow members of parliament, which I don't ask to rise up because there are also some present, I would say parliaments have a huge responsibility. And they must, because they must find a way to find compromises in negotiations that is needed. And on the other hand, we must have discussions, and sometimes we need even discussions with decisions by majority. If you work in any question for a compromise which is sufficient for everyone, you lose any link to the people. Therefore, that is what we call leadership, that's what we call charisma, and what we have to work for is to find the right balance between looking for compromises and leadership and decision. If we do it in the right way, with strong parties. And I give another example as well, always with all the respect to France, which is as our president just has mentioned, and with all the respect to President Macron. You can see, if you follow, and I'm neighbor of France, my constituency is entered the city of Strasbourg. If you look carefully what's happened in France, even a president like President Emmanuel Macron, without strong political parties, get yellow baskets on the streets, and I prefer to have the discussions in the parliament and the competition between political parties. Therefore, we as members of political parties have to know that we have a huge responsibility for the stability of democracy.
Thank you very much. Before going to questions, I also want just one thing on this, because being political scientists these days, we are going from conference to conference on populism, rise of nationalism, and there is one thing that is important. I do believe in democratic politics. We're in the same moment in which economists have been in 2008, 2009, about the economic system. And the idea was we had the illusion that we're beyond boost and bump, beyond the crisis, but in a certain way, people are never going to know why nationalism is a problem if they don't have experience with it. And from this point of view, even in Central and Eastern Europe, now you have a new generation of governments and liberals coming, whose liberalism is very much the response to what they're seeing in their countries in the last years. So from this point of view, populism can be destructive, but this is also like a vaccine, and we are all pro-vaccine. If you basically are not going to create immunity of the system, if you basically believe that this type of a consensual politics is forever, we are going to be much more shattered. And I do believe that if there are going to be resilience enough in our political system, all the things that you're talking about in 5 years are going to be much more stable than they were 5 years ago. Because we have slightly forgot all the things that basically democracy are part of democracy too. There was a popular American historian who said that the best way to defend democracy is to argue about democracy. To disagree what democracy is. And I do believe from this point of view, in the last 5 years, we talk much more seriously about democracy than in the period when nobody was contesting it. So, but please, it's...
But on that vein, if I just may say, in America, we have many people who have fled autocratic systems and nationalism. So they have experienced it. And we have so many newcomers in our country, which we consider to be a blessing and reinvigoration of our society. But they bring a different kind of wisdom to making judgments about falling prey to some kind of populist argument or some kind of nationalist argument because they have experienced it. But it also goes back to 5G, because if you're talking about more or less democracy, well, the internet has democratized communication, in some ways for better, in some ways not so. But if you're expanding that communication and you're doing so a way that is slanted to autocracy, then you are standing in the way of more democracy. These things are not unrelated.
Yeah. Mr. President, please, the floor is yours. Yeah, please. Mr. Chairman, yeah, please.
She's from China.
Yeah, yeah.
Hello. I'm from the National People's Congress of China, and I have a very good memory of your successful visit, the construction dialogue we had about the relationship a few years ago. My question is about Huawei. I think my knowledge of how the world works is that technology is a tool. And China, since its reform started 40 years ago, have introduced all kinds of Western technologies. Microsoft, IBM, Amazon, they are all active in China. And since we started with first G, second G, third G, fourth G, all the technologies came from Western countries, from the developed world. And China has maintained its political system. The system led by the Communist Party has become successful. It's not threatened by the technologies. How come if Huawei's technology with 5G is introduced into Western countries, then it will threaten the political system? Do you really think the democratic system is so fragile that it could be threatened by this single high-tech company of Huawei?
Let me just say to you that are applauding back there that Huawei was created by reverse technology of American initiatives. That was one of the main ways that they got started. So yeah, we know the capability that Huawei has. We do not want to emulate the Chinese system. We don't want to be arresting millions of Uyghurs, threatening Tibet in terms of its culture, religion, and faith, undermining democracy in Hong Kong, etc. So it isn't a question of we have Huawei and we are a model, so why are you afraid of Huawei? We understand the power of technology, and I say, and I've been tracking China for 30 years on trade and the rest of it in terms of intellectual property and the rest, and I tell you, unequivocally, without any hesitation, be very careful when we go down this path, unless you want to end up with a society like China or an economy like China, which is not in the free enterprise mode. And I say this in friendship to China. When I visited you, it was about climate issues, and China is on the forefront of doing many great things on climate issues and in so many ways that I could enumerate. So we work together in that regard, but that does not dismiss the idea of repression that is ongoing and intensifying in China. And again, if you want a free flow of information, if you want to build a collective conscience of values and respect for human rights and the rest, don't go near Huawei. And instead, let's internationalize, build something together that will be about freedom of information. And I say that as a bipartisan initiative that we had in our
I agree with all
organization.
what Nancy said, but I would like to add two short remarks. The one is with all the respect, my understanding from the art of control from central government about all the society and economy in China is a little bit different to that what I want to have in Europe, number one. Number two, if we want in this world with globalization needs to bigger units, but if we want to secure freedom, we need diversity, and we have to fight against monopols. And even a duopoly is not what I like. Therefore, the best for us Europeans is not only be linked to decide between the Californian model of Silicon Valley or the state control model of China, and therefore we have to follow the recommendation of our federal president, strengthen European as only a part of for diversity to secure freedom in the future.
If I just may say, in line with what the president said, in keeping with what you just said, it's about imagination. The poet Shelley once said, the greatest force for moral good is imagination. Imagination to be creative, of course, but also imagination to put yourself in other people's shoes, understand. Communication so important, dialogue so important. That's why we always salute the ambassador for bringing us together in candor, but also committed in most cases to shared values about the dignity and worth of every person, about the spark of divinity that exists in them. And that's why I always say at this Security Conference, it might not sound as security-oriented, but I do think that the arts, issues that bring us together, where we laugh together, cry together, inspire together, have common ground together, can help us and walk away from some of our differences, can be a path to better understanding and better understanding of how we respect the dignity and worth of every person, which is what the United Nations was about and what we protect and defend with NATO. That's it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And I do believe we touched something which is really critical turning point. And this is that for years, particularly in Europe, we betted that economic interdependency is increasing security, full stop. And now we know that it can increase security, it can decrease security. And from this point of view, finding the border, probably the border between the commercial and the security is the least guarded border in the world today. And this is what we're discussing. But please, we have a time for one more round of questions, please.
Peter Limburg from Deutsche Welle. Excuse me, I just want to make a short remark to our guest from China. I like the argument concerning Huawei and the approach to technology, but it would be much more credible if the Communist Party of China would allow, for instance, Deutsche Welle's program to be received in China, or the BBC, or it would be open to Twitter or Facebook. This would be much more credible. Excuse me, I had to make this remark. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Please.
My name is Lia Quartapelle and I'm from the Italian Parliament. I have a question. To what extent do you think that Trump is a parenthesis in how the US thinks about transatlantic relationship? I mean, we all know that there is a big difference between what Trump thinks about the multilateral system and what Obama thought. But some other remarks are similar to what Obama was saying. The push for an increase of military spending, for example, came from President Obama, and I think both were right. The shift to Asia was something that came from the Obama times. So, I mean, this is a place where we have to be very frank and open about the quality of our relationship, and I think the answer to this question defines very clearly what the quality of our relationship will be in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a great question. We know that you are...
It's about Trump, President Trump. Well, I would only just state again that we have one of the largest bipartisan, bicameral House and Senate delegations visiting the Munich Security Conference here. And it is, again, our salute to multilateralism, to our respect for the transatlantic relationship. Yes, the Wales agreement that called for the increase in 2% is something that happened under President Obama, and then now President Trump takes credit for all the money that has come in, but it is an initiative that they both share. And it's interesting to me as a Californian to hear people talk about the shift to Asia. It wasn't a shift to Asia, it was at the expense of Europe. And that I think is really important for everyone to be assured. It was not at the expense of our transatlantic relationship, which is the heart of the matter of our security. Europeans have been involved in Asia for a long time. We have proximity from the West Coast, so now we are as well. But again, in terms of some of these issues, like Huawei, we have bipartisan agreement on that. I always say to the members, don't be against something because President Trump might be for it. If there's bilateral, if there happens to be what we call collateral benefit, so be it. Then let's all share in the responsibility to do something and the credit when we get it done, including, as I saw Prime Minister Trudeau here earlier, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. So wherever we can find agreement, whoever gets credit for it. Yes.
Mr. President.
I think I can't better answer than our federal president has done in his speech. Therefore, I will only say, please, he has said we need, of course, a transatlantic partnership, and it's the basis for our security for the time being foreseen. But to strengthen transatlantic partnership, the Europeans have to contribute more, and not only in budget affairs, but also in taking, as your colleague Kagan shortly wrote, in moral costs as well. And having said this, my third remark is, we Europeans have to prove, even in our daily work, that we will not allow that there will be a new division in Europe between East and West. It's very important that we Europeans prove ourselves able, first of all, to stabilize Europe and European neighborship with all the respect as well. We can see do better in partnership with the United States, but that's what we have to do.
Thank you very much. And I want to give the floor to Ambassador Ischinger, but if I can summarize, Huawei in Europe welcome when Deutsche Welle is welcome in China. So thank you very much.
If I just may say, all of us here who are from the U.S. take an oath to protect and defend. That's the oath of office we take. And security is so central to that, and this discussion so important. So thank you again, Mr. Ambassador, for bringing us together to help us protect and defend all of our people.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, Herr Bundestagsmann. If you allow, before I say thank you to the two of you, I want to do something which I was unable to do after the introductory speech by President Steinmeier, namely to thank him for this very, very important speech. So thank you again, Herr Bundespräsident. And thank you so much, both of you. This was a very interesting discussion. Thank you, Ivan, for having carried the ball through this hour of discussion. Thank both of you. The program will continue in just a few minutes with Justin Trudeau, so stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.